phenomenal cosmic powers!
Itty bitty living space.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode. Glad you could join us. Today we're working on, what is this thing called?
Ghostkeel.
A Ghostkeel. Keel. A guy within a guy. It's like a double episode. Should be more of a Christmas special.
So we started with the black prime, and then we white primed over that, and now we're painting all of the black parts. So instead of just painting the whole thing Ulthuan gray, I've decided to try to do a little bit of blending in here to try to give a little bit more volume. So we're doing kind of a gradient of the Ulthuan gray as the brightest highlight, and then down to darker grays on top of that. These are all going to be wet blended together, so I'm going to put some the darker, the lighter, and then just kind of use a wet brush to mix the borders in between them. After I'm kind of done doing that, I probably will go back in and just make sure that the areas that I want the brightest still have that bright highlight. Then we move on to the helmet. I'm going to do the same thing again. I've got Mephiston Red, and I've got Evil Sunz Scarlet. I'm going to place the Mephiston Red on the bottom, Evil Sunz on top, and then kind of drag a brush in between them to get that wet blend. But wait, there's more. We're going to do it for the gray too.
Eagle-eyed viewers will see that the base has already been decorated with stones and other terrain features, and usually that's a last step, but it is a first-ish step because this guy had to be glued right down to his base.
And beat the devil out of it.
But the base isn't done. There's a lot done.
So now we're getting into oil paints. It's really not that bad. We're just going to thin it down with our white spirits and dab it into panel lines, each of the corners, wherever there's connecting pieces, and then take a Q-tip, dip that into the white spirits, and just kind of dab it off. It cleans up pretty well. I would recommend you do a clear coat in between. I didn't, which means I got some staining, but that's okay because as part of the next step, we are going to clean it up.
Little Bob Ross paint here, coming from my personal Bob Ross kit, which if you can't paint, I don't know that I'd recommend, because I can't paint and nothing really worked out from that kit for me.
That's okay, it's working out pretty well here. So we're just going to continue on and apply and remove, and it really does a good job of getting into those cracks and crevices and provides a really nice contrast on the model. I will mention again that the clear coat is really recommended before you put on the oil paint, and the Q-tip, it can be aggressive, so makeup sponge might be a better choice.
Adding texture here with a tiny little sea sponge.
Right, as I mentioned before, the oil paint did kind of stain up the coats a little bit, so going back with the Ulthuan gray over it really puts texture on and kind of takes away that staining while still showing that there's wear and tear and weathering on the battlesuit. Continuing on, we're still going to do that edge highlighting on the black, which is just using a different gray that's a little bit lighter colored on it. So we've put down the oil paint, we've kind of sponged back on some of that Ulthuan gray. We're now going to be doing the edge highlighting. This is a pretty important part, and it really brings, again, that highlight. We had the dark shadows before the oil paint, and now we're going to have the white highlight to get that high contrast onto the vehicle. This was really probably one of the most time-consuming parts of painting the whole thing, and I think it really is one of the best ways to make the biggest impact on the model. If you take your time, you can see I'm mostly concentrating on the top edges, but even some of these vertical ones. So just take your time and make that very small, thin line and get a nice edge highlight. Sometimes you make a little mistake. That's okay. You can just go right back to the Ulthuan gray and clean things up. I'm also taking the time to do the edge highlights for the other parts. You can see where I have these gray panels, I just get a slightly lighter colored gray and go over that to get the edge highlight for those parts too.
Here we have a nice zoom in on the painting of the lens.
This unfortunately took more than one try. Moving on, we're going to be painting these elbow joint things gold. I'm not really sure what those are, but once we're done, we put some Agrax Earthshade over them. So before we talked about how I kind of covered up the staining from the oil paint with some Ulthuan gray, but now to kind of give a highlight over that, we're going to use just the pure white. You can also see it kind of got messy there, but we can just touch up with the regular paint. For the helmet, I'm using straight Wild Ryder red. I'm going all the way around where the ball turret with the lenses and also hitting the top surfaces for a nice edge highlight. As mentioned before, it's important to get a very thin line here because any of the previous Evil Sunz Scarlet, you're going to want to be thinner than that. So to finish up the helmet, I made sure to get my edge highlights for the black portion there, and then use some electric blue from Iron Painter, which is pretty thin stuff, to give a blue tint to that eyepiece. Not previously mentioned, but I did magnetize the weapons. You can kind of check out my other video where I magnetized the crisis suits. And now the weathering fun starts. I've got my sponge back out and I'm using Rhinox hide to kind of catch some upturned edges, kind of the outer corners, anything that, you know, if this guy was bumbling around in the dark, he would be running into things. So we'll take different edges, any place where a chip might come out. You look around on the internet for images and they're a lot more heavily done up than this one is, but we'll go in and kind of go over where we did the white edge highlights.
Adding the decals here, you just soak those in a little bit of water and then use a little paintbrush to kind of slide them into place.
Much like the oil painting, it's probably a good idea to have a clear coat before you put this on, and I think in some cases it's good to put vinegar on to soak it out, to dissolve it, and then on top of that use alcohol to get the water dried up as quickly as possible.
And now we come to my favorite part of the video, which is finishing off that base, adding a little bit of highlight there on some of those rocks, really making them pop out.
So we mentioned before that we started off doing the base because we wanted to glue it on as quickly as possible, but that was just kind of a Vallejo earth texture. Painted over that. It's good to do the dry brush. You can see I have those kind of rocks, and we've got the bushes. But the other thing that I decided to do to enhance the base is to put on these other spare bits and pieces. I painted some of the different parts of the model that I didn't put on. I think there might be drone parts, and so I painted them just like the rest of the model, but then attached them to the base. And once we're done with that, it's the only thing left to do is to paint the base. Always paint your rims.
There he is, finished Ghostkeel. Came out well. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
This was a lot of fun, and I did enter into the Auspex Tactics Spring 2022 painting competition where I got top 10. A lot of fun, I appreciate it.